A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. On the program, in just a couple of minutes, Dr. Dennis Petrocelli is going to join us, a forensic psychiatrist, member of Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership, taking a look at a proposal by Bloomberg Media, not Michael Bloomberg himself, although I'm sure that he loves the idea, of banning gun possession for those convicted of misdemeanor DUIs. There's some funny figures that the editorial board at Bloomberg.com throwing around, so we'll get to that with Dr. Dennis Petrocelli here in just a matter of moments, but we do have some breaking news to get to. This morning, the Supreme Court denied an appeal by Remington seeking to block a lawsuit filed on behalf of parents whose children were murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary in Connecticut. Basically, the challenge was originally brought against the firearms manufacturer. A lower court judge ruled that the lawsuit could not continue because of the Federal Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, which prevents lawsuits seeking to hold gun manufacturers responsible for the third-party actions of criminals. The Connecticut State Supreme Court reversed that lower court decision and said, in essence, the gun company could be sued over its marketing practices. That there was an exemption in consumer law in the state that allowed for this lawsuit to proceed. So in other words, it wasn't covered under the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. So this ruling by the Supreme Court, or lack of a ruling, basically, the denial of this appeal, does not necessarily weaken the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act or any of the state-level protections that are in place. However, gun control groups are certainly going to try to exploit the Supreme Court decision to the best of their abilities. In any other state where suits like this can now proceed, you can rest assured that they are going to try to bring additional litigation against other firearms manufacturers, perhaps even in the state of Connecticut. So we will keep a close eye on this. We're going to have additional coverage at Bearing Arms. National Shooting Sports Foundation will be releasing a statement later today. We'll have that for you as well. But that is the breaking news as we broadcast here on this Tuesday. Now let's get to our interview with Dennis Petrocelli, a forensic psychiatrist in the Richmond, Virginia area, a member of Doctors for Responsible Gun Owners, and Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership, and a guy who did a deep dive into this editorial from Bloomberg.com about the quote-unquote common sense idea of denying gun ownership to those convicted of misdemeanor DUIs. Take a look and a listen. Dr. Dennis Petrocelli with Doctors for Responsible Gun Owners is with us. Dr. Petrocelli, it's good to talk with you again, sir.
Good morning, Cam. It's great to be back on the program. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And I read with great interest a piece that you had published at The Truth About Guns, talking about this new editorial that came out. Now, this didn't come out from Michael Bloomberg himself, but the editorial board of Bloomberg.com had this story or this opinion piece a few days ago talking about why we should ban gun ownership for those convicted of a DUI. And basically, they're making the argument that, okay, if somebody gets pulled over for driving drunk, that demonstrates irresponsibility. That could lead to more irresponsible behavior with a firearm. They even talk about some study that purports to show that those who've been pulled over for DUIs go on to commit violent crimes at a much higher rate than the general population. Now, I confess I'm not a fan of drunk driving, but I'm also not a fan of people losing their constitutional rights because of a misdemeanor conviction. And this is one of the things that really concerns me, is that we're lowering the bar to strip people of their rights. And we're trying to make it as easy as possible to do so. But you've actually taken a look at some of the data here, right?
Correct, I did. And let me first say, I, like every other reasonable person, would not want someone who is actively misusing alcohol to have access to a firearm. And essentially what Bloomberg did was make use of an article that ascribed guilt to this group of people without establishing that connection whatsoever. So it was essentially guilt by association. And it's the standard playbook that the public health apparatus uses. It creates these emotional arguments that in the moment are seemingly difficult to argue with until you actually look at the objective data. And the objective data is so compelling. Let me quote from that editorial first, because
Sure.
it really hit me right between the eyes. And I said, I've got to get a hold of the original source here to check this out. It closes with the quote, "For lawmakers eager to make progress against gun violence, they," meaning gun owners that have a prior DUI, "are too good a target to ignore." And that's a pretty powerful statement, because it's essentially saying that a component of the so-called gun violence epidemic is related to gun purchasers who have a prior DUI. And that's an outrageous claim, especially when you look at the data. Unfortunately, my deconstruction of this article is somewhat technical and numbers-oriented. Let me give you an overview, and then we could lose ourselves in the weeds if we have to.
Sure.
This study looked at roughly 80,000 handgun purchasers in the state of California who purchased handguns in the year 2001. Let me say right off the top, it should disturb people that researchers would have access to who bought handguns in any given year and then was able to query a criminal database to cross-reference these people. So in terms of thinking about registries and how registries lead to confiscation, that in and of itself should be pretty disturbing.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So what then happens is they looked at these 80,000 folks. They, right off the top, excluded everybody over the age of 50 because those people tend to not be violent. And hey, let's not have a valid sample here. Let's exclude people and just enrich it with those who could possibly be violent. Notwithstanding that, of the 80,000 people who purchased handguns, 1,495, so 1,495, had a prior DUI conviction. So some quick numbers here. We're looking at a very small percentage of people that even had a DUI conviction.
Mm-hmm.
Remember what Bloomberg's editorial said, that these people are a prime target if you want to reduce gun violence. Well, in my mind, that means they're committing gun violence. So what does the article actually say about that? Well, only 2.5% of the 1,495 of the 80,000 had a firearm-related charge. That works out to be 37 people.
Out of 80,000.
Out of 80,000. And that's just a charge. Now, in California, I suspect that the defensive gun usage is likely to incur you a charge, and then after you convincingly prove your innocence, perhaps they let you go. So we don't even know what percentage of those charges were appropriate, that there actually was an offense committed.
Right, but even if it were all 37, I mean, you're talking again about 80,000 people, 1,495 of them who purchased a firearm had a previous DUI conviction, but 37 of those nearly 1,500 individuals went on to be charged with a crime. I mean, Dr. Petrocelli, that's almost statistical noise at that point. That's not the basis of some policy that would, deprive people of their constitutional rights for a misdemeanor conviction.
Absolutely. And one of the things, and the reason why it's so important to emphasize that it's noise and that we're talking about a constitutional protected God-given right is we have to consider what is the public health downside to gun confiscation. Now, I hear myself as I utter those words that the whole public health apparatus would have a collective cow over that concept. But it's a cow that needs to be had because every time we take a gun away from a law-abiding citizen, we have endangered the republic, not only in terms of self-defense against criminals, but obviously against the deterrent against tyranny. And what is always lacking in any of these public health, and I'm making air quotes, you can't see me, but public health arguments about gun confiscation is that they never contemplate defensive gun usage.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a gun violence symposium here in Richmond some weeks ago that was sponsored by the Virginia Department of Health, Virginia Commonwealth University, and of course Lori Haas had her hand all over it, was one of the presenters. And the psychiatrist, who is a highly regarded psychiatrist, had never heard the phrase defensive gun usage. It wasn't even in her vocabulary, and I believe she was being completely honest when she said that. And that tells me that we're not looking at the downside. When we do things in medicine, we always contemplate what, for example, for medicines, we talk about what's the number needed to treat. In other words, how many people do I have to give this to make someone better versus how many people do I have to give this to harm them in some way. And we look at that ratio. There is a downside to taking guns away, and they never talk about that. And it is absolutely maddening.
Absolutely. And you talk a little bit about these red flag laws, but, you talk about some of the funny numbers that are coming out. One of the things that I've noticed recently is that the advocates of these red flag legislations, they talk about Indiana and Connecticut and how gun-related suicides dropped after red flag laws got put in place in those two states, but they never talk about the fact that overall suicide rates actually increased in both Indiana and Connecticut. And so if the goal is to prevent suicides and not just fire-related suicides, it would seem that these red flag laws have a lot of problems, as you and I have talked about before, the fact that they don't really address the mental health of the individual. But it seems like this is now a pattern with, gun control activists, particularly those within the academic community, to sort of make these studies say whatever they want them to say.
Right. There's lies, damn lies in statistics. And so when they talk about an increase in violence, I could say this. Let's say I had a condition where 1 in 100 people were affected, and some agent increased that from 2 out of 100. Well, I've doubled the incidence of that condition. And so I could say that, wow, I've created a 100% increase in this condition with my agent. Well, it's still 2 out of 100. What are we talking about? 98% of the public doesn't have to worry about it. Well, they'll run with statistics like that. And that's what they did in this case. So what they did was they said, well, look, the rate of violence that these people are charged with doubled. Mind you, charged, not convicted. But the gun violence was astonishingly low and probably negligible after we take out defensive gun usage. So it's all guilt by association. It's all by sleight of hand. Looking at the red flag law business, the particular study in question used a statistical method to compare what the suicide rate was compared to what it would have been expected to have been had that law not been passed. So they're not even they use what I would call monopoly money, right? It's fake. They're not looking at actuarial historical data. They're comparing it via statistical methods. If you look at the graphs on Connecticut, they're unequivocal. Sure, gun suicide went down, no kidding. But all other cause suicide matched it. And that's exactly what we would expect. If you don't fundamentally treat the individual, you're not going to bend the curve on either of these things.
Absolutely.
And what's astonishingly absent in all of this, if it was a good faith effort to save lives, we'd be talking about two things. What works against suicide? What works against inner city gang and drug related gun violence?
Yeah. And maybe a third, maybe if you want to add in domestic violence as well.
Sure.
But I think if you dealt with those three things, that's the vast majority of the amount of violent crime that we're talking about in this country.
Right. Public health is always supposed to be about going, what's going to get us the biggest bang for our buck? How could we save as many lives as expeditiously as possible? Why are you looking at 37 people out of 80,000? It just boggles the mind.
Dr. Dennis Petrocelli with Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership. As always, sir, it is great talking with you today. Appreciate you coming on the program.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Cam.
You bet. All right, let's get to today's armed citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our recidivism report. We will start there from Florida. Yeah, another story involving Florida woman. Florida woman who tried to run over two deputies only to be shot and killed, identified as somebody who is, unfortunately, no stranger to the law at the ripe old age of 20. Sydney Alexis Renew. Shot and killed by deputies in Florida Monday afternoon as she was behind the wheel of a stolen Ford F-250. Sheriff's office says she tried to run two deputies over, according to WPTV. Scott Wilder, who's the public information officer in Polk County, Florida, said witnesses said she revved the engine and she had it floored. It was quickly accelerating right towards the deputies. It had actually come past the deputies in through two trees and hit the ditch. That's where it stopped. The engine was still running in drive. This all began about 11:30 Monday morning. Deputies got a call about a stolen pickup truck. Deputy Jessica LeBlanc spotted the stolen vehicle. She was backed up by Deputy Christian Pinnell. They approached the truck on foot. They asked Renew to turn the truck off and get out. Instead, according to witnesses, Renew began revving the engine and then drove right towards the two deputies, both of whom opened fire, killing Renew. One witness said, "I'm glad everything took place right there because literally a couple of hundred feet away, my children were here. They were out in the yard. They literally had no idea that anything was going on. And the situation could have been much worse than it was." She said they did what they needed to do today. And most of all, we didn't lose any deputies because we could have. According to WPTV, Renew, at age 20 at the time of her death, had a lengthy criminal history that included a total of 14 felonies and 6 misdemeanors, 20 criminal charges for every year of her life, 14 felonies and 6 misdemeanors for both juvenile and adult charges. And again, out on the street behind the wheel of a stolen vehicle, and her life ended too early. Now, our armed citizen story today from Memphis, Tennessee, Fox 13 in Memphis, saying that police called to the Coves at Yale Apartments on Sunday, where they found a woman who was shot trying to break into an apartment complex. Erica Glass, now charged with aggravated burglary in this crime. One neighbor said that she was asleep when she heard the sound of somebody trying to break in. She had told Fox 13, "I heard a boom coming from across the hall, and my husband and my daughter and I jumped." She said, "I heard after that a woman say, 'She shot me.'" The resident told Fox 13 that Erica Glass had started banging on her patio door around 4 a.m. Sunday. That's when she heard noises that sounded like gunshots and glass breaking. She said, "I really haven't slept since then." She said that she heard somebody trying to get in through her son's bedroom window. She said, "My neighbor said she was going around twisting the knobs, ringing the doorbells." The victim in this case told police that she had asked Glass to get away from her door. She said Glass wouldn't leave, ended up breaking the glass on the patio door. And when she entered the home, that is when the victim fired. Police found the 32-year-old suspect out on the street when they arrived. They said she was covered in blood, holding mail, trash, and a water hydrant cover in her hands. Glass told police that the apartment belonged to her and that the victim needed to get out. So clearly, this a woman troubled, facing charges, but hopefully can get perhaps some mental health as well, help as well. That victim, again, acting in self-defense, not going to be facing any charges. Now, our good deed of the day from St. Augustine, Florida, where a Naval Reserve officer in the right place at the right time and willing and able to do the right thing. This was Friday morning. Ryan Sidlofsky is a reservist there in St. Augustine. He said he and his wife were on their way home from dropping their daughter off at school when they saw a red car zoom out of a gas station parking lot, and then it ended up going out of control. Witnessed the car dodge 2 trees, then crash into a retention pond at a nearby complex. Ryan ran into the water there. He said, initially, I'd say it was about waist deep to where I was, and then I remembered I had a window breaker tool in my car, so I ran to get that, ran back out. He said, by that time, the car was getting deeper, so I was kind of treading water. I smashed the window in with the window breaker. Water quickly filling the vehicle, started to sink faster. Then a few minutes, it was completely underwater. He said, we went down, and I was trying to get her out of the car, but I couldn't. He said, I think she was having a hard time swimming against the current of the water rushing into the car. So he went back up, took another deep breath, went back down, and was able to actually extract the woman from the driver's seat. His wife, Francie, calls it a miracle, said, Ryan, having served in the Marine Corps for many years and now in Navy Reserves, is training as a Delta pilot. He was the one for the job. I just felt like this is where we needed to be in that moment. That driver is going to be okay. No serious injuries. And again, in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. Ryan Sedlowski, there in St. Augustine, Florida, we thank you, sir, for your good deed. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program as well. Don't forget, you can get exclusive content at Bearing Arms by becoming a VIP member, VIP Gold. You even get exclusive editor chats and more. You can sign up today at bearingarms.com. You can use the promo code CAM, C-A-M, and you can get a nice little discount. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Bearing Arms Cam & Company at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or the townhall.com podcast page. You can subscribe to Townhall Media at YouTube as well. And we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company, bringing you the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. We'll see you tomorrow.